Profound and subtle Dharma is rarely encountered in eons. Now we hear and follow it. May we realize the Tathagata's meaning. To liberate beings, please generate bodhicitta before teaching. Today, we will begin discussing the verses in the Shurangama Sutra. Regarding verses, as I mentioned earlier, there are two types of verses. One type is what we call reiterative verses, or repeating verses. Repeating verses mean that they reiterate. Whether called repeating or reiterative verses, they essentially follow the preceding prose sections and then use the format of verses to summarize the teachings. We have already discussed this section earlier. There is another type called isolated verses. As for isolated verses, their content is composed directly and abruptly. The Buddha's words, they just like how some plants suddenly sprout up from the ground. From the ocean of the thus come one's wisdom, some profoundly deep principles are revealed. This is called isolated arising. As for isolated verses, actually within the 12 divisions of the Buddha's canon, there is also a specific category for this type of scripture. In fact, both the reiterative verses and the isolated verses are contained within the 12 divisions of the Buddhist canon. Next, we will discuss the isolated verses. A knot must be untied according to a certain sequence, and when the 6 have been untied, the one will vanish too. Choose one perceiving faculty and realize your breakthrough. Enter the current. Realize the true enlightenment. This verse means what will be explained next, untying the knots. Because yesterday Ananda also asked about this, he did not understand how the root of both samsara and nirvana is the 6 faculties. So if the knots are to be untied, how is it done? He did not quite understand this principle. Therefore the Buddha said that untying these knots of ours should be done according to a sequence. Following a sequence, when the 6 have been untied, when the 6 knots have been untied, the one will vanish too. At that time not even a single knot will remain. There are quite a few ways to explain this. You can look at different commentaries when the time comes. Some explain it as, if the 6 faculties are untied, then the Dharma of nirvana is also unestablished. There is this kind of explanation. But some Dharma masters refute this explanation. Here it explains that the 6 knots, the 6 types of knots in our cycle of samsara, as long as they are untied, then it is impossible for even one to remain. They will all completely vanish. And what is the method for this? Actually it is choose one perceiving faculty and realize your breakthrough. Among our 6 faculties of eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body and mind, we must choose one perfect and penetrating faculty. As we mentioned earlier the other day regarding the ear faculty, among all the 6 faculties, the ear faculty is the most suitable. If we start with the ear faculty first, then the other faculties can also be fully comprehended through it. In this way, by choosing one faculty among them, the other faculties can also be fully comprehended through it. Thus, enter the current, realize the true enlightenment. In this way, what current does one enter? One achieves true enlightenment, meaning the awakening of a sage, that is to say, attaining Buddhahood within the path of true awakening. It means that when we proceed according to a sequence to understand the fundamental nature of the 6 faculties, we feel that the 6 faculties are a relatively good approach. However, a few Dharma masters in Chinese Han Buddhism do not explain it this way. As for this method, we will understand it later. Today we will, next, using an analogy, the Buddha will explain the 6 knots and how to untie them. This issue will be discussed next.
We might not necessarily finish it in this class. He explains it using an analogy below, so that if among these 6 knots one does not exist, the others will not exist either. Or we can say that not a single one of the 6 knots remains. It is understood in this way. This is the general content of this verse. From subtle adana, the storehouse consciousness, the energy of habits can burst forth into a torrent. Lest you confuse the true with what's untrue, I rarely speak of this. Here it says adana. This adana means ālaya-vijñāna. Actually, adana means ālaya. Adana, the terminology at that time should be like this: what we call the storehouse consciousness, or the 8th consciousness, the ālaya-vijñāna. The ālaya-vijñāna is actually profound. Here it implies very deep and subtle, meaning extremely fine. Here the ālaya-vijñāna is an incredibly deep and subtle consciousness. Within the ālaya-vijñāna, there are various pure and impure habit energies. Through the ālaya, this torrent of habit energies naturally becomes the torrent of birth and death, which like a great river flows forth directly. So here there is the true phenomena of true nature, purity and nirvana exist here, and the untrue, what is not genuinely real but worldly, false, defiled and afflictive, these also exist within the ālaya-vijñāna. But regarding such principles there is a fear, a concern, that if they are taught to ordinary followers of the 2 vehicles, Sravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, or if they are taught to ordinary people, they would be completely unable to accept them. For this reason, I rarely speak of this. The Buddha did not broadly teach this concept of the ālaya. Of course, apart from a few Mahayana practitioners, mainly of the mind-only school, within our worldly vehicles, or within the Sravaka and Pratyeka Buddha vehicles, the ālaya is basically not revealed or spoken of. It is like having a particularly precious treasure house in the world, whether it holds gold, silver and jewels inside, or these impure weapons and various other things. This treasure house is not casually spoken of to outsiders. It is only discussed with those on the inside. This treasure house is very important. So the ālaya-vijñāna is actually the most encompassing element within the mind streams of us sentient beings. It contains the most things with various seeds stored right there. Actually, if you contemplate this carefully, it is truly very fascinating. Why do each of us sentient beings have different habit energies? We have virtuous roots and also unvirtuous roots. Or what kind of we have good traits and bad traits. We notice this in ourselves, right? Sometimes we feel that, oh, when I encounter the forms of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, I act like this, as if we have very deep virtuous roots. But sometimes when facing objects that trigger greed, anger and ignorance, or when encountering adverse conditions, it seems we have absolutely no way to control our afflictions, feeling as though we might be the most malicious people in the world. Why is this? Actually, there are simply too many seeds inside our ālaya. Once the habit energies manifest, we have no choice. Under different causes and conditions, various kinds of results will manifest before us. Because the ālaya contains so many seeds, it preserves them. And once the causes and conditions are complete, these seeds pour outward, blossoming and bearing fruit. At this time, we have no choice but to experience their scenes of suffering and happiness. The scriptural proofs we usually memorize are also identical to this. Moreover, in many Mahayana treatises, we frequently quote the Sandhi-nirmocana Sutra. Masters like Chang Shui have all quoted it. It is explained in a way that is easier to understand in the Sandhi-nirmocana Sutra. How is it stated there? The ālaya-vijñāna is profound and subtle, with all seeds flowing like a waterfall. I do not expound it to ordinary people, lest they discriminate and cling to it as self. The ālaya-vijñāna, just as mentioned earlier, is extremely profound and subtle. All seeds reside within it. All these seeds of samsara are like a raging torrent, flowing continuously without end. The Buddha did not teach this to ordinary people, and especially not to those of the 2 vehicles or below. What is the reason? He feared they would grasp it as a self, because for the ālaya, if it is grasped as a self, that will not do, because externalists often consider the ālaya to be the self, or something else, understanding it as some sort of creator. So why did the Buddha, in general, ordinary sutras not speak of it? This is the reason. Therefore, regarding this principle, perhaps everyone should carefully write it down in your notebooks. There are many profound meanings within this, and from one's own perception, there are indeed many things within the ālaya. Who knows what will be drawn out in the future? So even oneself might not be able to explain it clearly, because there are simply too many things inside of me. As long as the causes and conditions are complete, they will manifest. This is what it might be different in various translated versions, but we often, the scriptural proof from the Tibetan text I just quoted, everyone likes it very much, and many great Tibetan masters frequently quote it. We also hope that in the future, when expounding the sutras and teaching the Dharma, at least during a single class, you can quote several sutras and be able to recite them from memory. That would be excellent, right? This is very necessary. This was the content just now. The following verse is slightly more difficult to understand. You should bring forth your own wisdom to examine it. Some parts are very simple, you can easily grasp them. Some parts require a bit more effort. But when your mind grasps hold of your own mind, what's not illusion then becomes illusory. And if you don't grasp hold, then what is called illusion and what's not illusion too will not arise. How could what is illusion be established? The Tibetan translation and the translations in many commentaries might be slightly different. Let me first use the Tibetan method of translation. In the Tibetan translation, the word grasping here is explained as realization. It says that by using one's own mind to realize one's own mind, then the non-illusory things that are originally not illusory become just like illusory phenomena. The meaning is perhaps that the non-illusory which originally appears to ordinary people as things that are not like dreams or illusions also becomes like an illusion. Because when you realize all phenomena, everything is without inherent nature, like dreams and illusions, it is likely this way. And if you don't grasp hold, if you have not realized it, then the non-illusion does not arise. If you have not realized it, then the non-illusion does not exist either. The non-illusory refers to things as seen by worldly people. Things that are not illusory but truly existent. If you have not realized this, then this non-illusory thing is also neither the illusory nor the non-illusory exists. If the non-illusory does not exist, and the non-illusory does not arise, if even what is not illusory has not arisen, then the illusory goes without saying. How could it be established? It seems that if the word grasping is explained as realization in this way, it can also be interpreted like this. In Han Buddhism, there are some, of course the explanations by a few Dharma masters are slightly different, including Master Ji Huan of Wenling, Master O Yi and Master Jiao Guang. Each of their explanations is slightly different, but they certainly interpreted it profoundly as well. How do most of them explain it? Using one's own mind to grasp one's own mind, to grasp one's own mind. This grasping refers to the grasping of subject and object. If one uses one's own mind and begins to grasp at one's own mind, then what's not illusion becomes illusory. What is not illusory turns into illusion. If it is not illusory, could it be considered the true mind? Originally not illusory, could it be considered the true mind? But everlasting. In this case, because this mind of yours, your own mind, binds itself and grasps at itself, ultimately, what was originally not illusory, this everlasting true mind, eventually turns entirely into vain illusions, false appearances, becoming false sense objects, false illusions. Then, and if you don't grasp hold, if you do not grasp, if there is neither grasping subject nor grasped object, when samsara no longer exists in this way, then the non-illusory does not arise. At this time, even the non-illusory phenomena ceases to exist. Actually, if you truly do not grasp and have truly awakened, then that is the non-illusory. As for the non-illusory, which is actually everlasting and not an illusion, even this is unestablished, if the non-illusory too will not arise. If the non-illusory, what is not an illusion, does not arise, then how could illusory phenomena be established? The meaning is, if you have not realized this and cling to dualistic grasping, nothing can be accomplished. If you are free from dualistic grasping, one could say subject and object both vanish. Everything, subject and object, completely vanish. It is what we often say, there is nothing at all. That is to say, if there is no grasping whatsoever, ultimately resulting in a state of awakening, if one is already awakened in this way, then neither the illusory nor the non-illusory exists. Especially since the non-illusory does not exist. If the non-illusory does not exist, how could the illusory arise? Perhaps it is like this. You might need to look into this further yourselves. There are various commentaries and explanations. But if we use the Lankavatara Sutra and the principles taught within it to explain this, it might be a bit better. How is it explained in the Lankavatara Sutra? When bad habits take hold of the mind, various appearances arise, leading to delusion that they are outside the mind, and thus one falsely grasps at various forms and appearances. First, the Lankavatara Sutra mentions that the habit energies of our evil deeds permeate the mind, generating this appearance of dualistic grasping. At this time, various external appearances manifest. And then these various appearances we begin to grasp at them with our confused minds, believing that outside the mind there are mountains, rivers, the great earth, and so on. After doing this, what do we vainly grasp at? We grasp at these external forms. Of course, forms are just one aspect. There are forms, sounds, smells, and various images. The external white, red, blue, and green, all kinds of various phenomena, are the manifest appearances. Because of this, sentient beings can slowly wander adrift in this cycle of samsara. This is explained from the perspective of not having comprehended the truth. If one has already realized it, then how is it also explained in the Lankavatara Sutra? If you wish to see the truth, you must abandon all discrimination and attachment, cultivate the view of truth, and you will surely see the Buddha without a doubt. If we truly use our own mind to observe our own mind, free from all conceptualization, grasping subject and grasped object, and then continually practice, truly observing in this way, then actually seeing the Buddha is without any doubt, one will certainly be able to see the Buddha and also be able to see the true reality of all phenomena. The principle we discussed just now is also quite similar to what is taught in the Lankavatara Sutra. The Lankavatara Sutra within Tibetan Buddhism is also very important. Great masters also highly value the Lankavatara Sutra. Then it goes on to say, this Dharma may be called the wondrous lotus-flower, the royal, indestructible, magnificent awakening. This practice of samapati, though likened to illusion, can quickly bring you past the ones who need no further training. So this kind of just now everything is like a dream and an illusion, or as we often like to say in the ultimate truth, nothing is attainable. In the conventional truth, in the ultimate truth, it is free from the four extremes and conceptual fabrications. In the conventional truth, it is like a dream and an illusion. Actually, we could also say it this way, if you investigate further to the ultimate level, even the non-illusory is unestablished. Whenever one fully comprehends this principle, then this is a kind of samadhi. This samadhi is called in some sutras the samadhi of the wondrous lotus flower. Because the lotus flower has absolutely no defilements, it is completely pure and immaculate inside and out, exceedingly pure. This kind of samadhi, or in some sutras, is called the royal, indestructible, magnificent awakening. The royal, indestructible, magnificent awakening. In this state, nothing can destroy it. It crushes everything without being crushed. That is to say, no power or anything can destroy it. Therefore it is called the Vajra King. Among vajras, it is like a king. Furthermore, it is the magnificent awakening, something exceedingly precious, or an exceptionally supreme kind of awakening, just like the fruition of the thus come one. This is a name, and the practice of samapati, though likened to illusion. As for this samapati likened to illusion, many high monks and great masters rely on this samapati likened to illusion, playfully manifest within this world. So it can also be called, it has no inherent nature whatsoever, but relying on it one can also manifest to benefit countless sentient beings. This is called the practice of samapati, though likened to illusion. The meditative absorption they attain is like this. Then obtaining these merits and virtues can quickly bring you past the ones who need no further training. In the snap of a finger, in an instant, one can suddenly transcend to the stage of no further training. It could be said some places here, including in the Tibetan text, quickly bring you past the ones who need no further training. Bringing you past the ones who need no further training means transcending in a finger snap, having already left behind the stage of no further training. But from the perspective of the Mahayana, if one has already reached the stage of no further training, there is nothing further to transcend, right? Because the stage of no further training is the final destination, there is none. However, I saw in one commentary, a modern commentary says that it transcends the no further training of the two vehicles. The stage of no further training in the two vehicles is the arhat. Transcending that, one directly attains the fruition of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. That is also acceptable. There are also some. It should be in the commentary by Changshui Zixuan. It should be explained like this within it. This transcending in a finger snap to the stage of no further training means that already. As for this transcending in terms of elimination and realization, there are many transcendences finally arriving at the stage of no further training. So this principle is equivalent to what is taught in our Dozokchen tradition. Within a brief period of time, you can perfect all merits and virtues. They quoted half of a passage from the Sutra of Perfect Enlightenment. Later, I looked up the true meaning of the surrounding context in the Sutra of Perfect Enlightenment. To recognize the illusion is to be detached from it, without the need for any skillful means. To be detached from the illusion is to be enlightened, without any gradual stages. The Sutra of Perfect Enlightenment has already explained it like this. Knowing illusion, one then departs from all of this. And at this time, we do not need the various skillful means of the causal stages. After departing from illusion, actually, this is true enlightenment. This does not require going through stages. Therefore, in the sutras of the Mahayana exoteric tradition, it is also taught that in a brief period of time, one attains awakening or attains Buddhahood. Some say that the Tibetan Buddhist concept of attaining Buddhahood in one lifetime and so on, that these are unreasonable. Actually, this is also found in the Chan school, and it is also found in the Sutra of Perfect Enlightenment. Including what we have here, can quickly bring you past the ones who need no further training. It actually means that in the snap of a finger, one has already obtained such merits and virtues, perfecting everything. If one perfects many merits of the grounds and paths, this is certainly not unreasonable. Of course, if we ourselves, let alone the stage of no further training, cannot even attain some basic states, then we won't believe in anything and will harbor a kind of doubt. This is also a normal phenomenon. So what is taught in the Sutra of Perfect Enlightenment, to be detached from the illusion, is to be enlightened without any gradual stages. This is also very important. Everyone should frequently memorize this. Some of the most important points, including some of the relatively unique states and principles of our own tradition's Supreme Dzogchen, you should also memorize them yourselves. The reason for memorizing them in this way is, on one hand, when you generate doubts yourself, to destroy your own mountain of wrong views, this is necessary. On the other hand, when others attack you, you also need to bring forth such tools of wisdom and logical reasoning to carry out a refutation, or rather, to uproot the root of the opponent's wrong views. This is very necessary. It seems that the Sutra of Perfect Enlightenment has never been translated into Tibetan. It speaks a lot about the bodhisattva's states of realization, which is very good. If there is a need in the future, we'll see how it goes. Previously, Mr. Nan Huai Chin lectured on it. Mr. Nan Huai Chin's lectures should be very good. But regarding this Shurangama Sutra, I took a look. I don't know how they organized it. The Shurangama Sutra, he brings it over to the academic side, but some parts are not explained very extensively, so I just read a section. Nan Huai Chin's more famous ones are What Does the Diamond Sutra Say? And his commentary on the Sutra of Perfect Enlightenment. These are considered relatively famous. I don't know how he lectured on the Shurangama Sutra. It should be okay. Anyway, there are audio recordings of it, but I haven't listened to the audio recordings. Sometimes I see these older gurus and older leaders, their Mandarin is not spoken very well. So later on, as I kept listening, I couldn't quite get used to it. I think at that time, perhaps because of the era, some of the current Dharma masters and leaders, when they use the Chinese language, they all speak Mandarin quite acceptably. In the past, many of them were like that, right? So sometimes it is also a barrier. Our language is also like this. Then it goes on to say, this peerless Dharma is the road that all world-honored ones have walked to reach the gateway to nirvana. This peerless Dharma, Abhidharma, we often say higher knowledge, Mahayana and Hinayana Abhidharma. But the meaning of Abhidharma here is a peerless Dharma. It means that the principles just mentioned, the principles and thoughts of the Shurangama Sutra, are the most supreme, peerless Dharma. So it is actually the thus come ones of the 10 directions, the Bhagavan of the 10 directions, east, south, west, north, the 4 intermediate directions above and below. For the thus come ones of the 10 directions, it is the one road to the gateway of nirvana. We often in the Guhya Garbha Tantra and in some tantric teachings, the domain of practice for all Buddhas of the 10 directions, the pinnacle vehicle of all vehicles, and then the essential quintessence of whatever thus come ones and so on. There is also a lot of praise, especially when we teach the Guhya Garbha Tantra. A lot is said about this at the beginning. So here it also says that the principles mentioned above, or the principles taught within the Shurangama Sutra, are practically the most supreme Dharma. It is precisely by relying on such Dharma that the thus come ones of the 10 directions can attain realization. Therefore it is their only path, the only kind of practice. Their avenue is actually relying on such Dharma to attain non-dual nirvana. Here I saw that it seems in the Tang and Ming dynasties, some high monks at that time, just by reading this latter part, achieved some awakenings, but I don't remember this koan very clearly. The road that all world-honored ones have walked to reach the gateway to nirvana. If you look into this, you should be able to find some, including in the Tripitaka and commentaries, and some other Han books. Some great masters attained awakening by relying on this. However, if you look for it now, it's getting harder and harder to find on the internet. I don't know if it will get better in the future. Otherwise, regarding the Chonlong Tripitaka and the general Tripitaka now, sometimes trying to open them is very strenuous. A lot of materials from before are all now, let alone videos. Sometimes it is these koans are getting harder and harder to find, but this might be due to the pandemic. If the pandemic situation improves, things should get better in all aspects. Next it says, this verse has already been completely discussed. When they had heard this supreme compassionate instruction which the Buddha, the thus come one, had spoken in this combination of instructional and reiterative verses, with their luminous and wondrous truths, lucid and incisive, Ananda and the others in the great assembly all rejoiced, and their mind's eye opened to an understanding that was entirely new to them. Here it says, at this time Ananda and the assembly heard the Buddha's supreme compassionate instruction. The compassionate instruction just prior, regarding this compassionate instruction, one is Gaya and the other is Gatha. This is what I just mentioned earlier. One is repeating verses and the other is isolated verses. Using these two forms of verses, this portion of principles was taught. As for this portion of principles, in terms of the expressing words and phrases, it is a combination luminous and wondrous. The words and phrases are entirely including the preceding repeating verses, as well as the isolated verses. The two styles are blended together, exceptionally wondrous, clear and brilliant. This is speaking from the perspective of the words and phrases. Then from the perspective of the expressed meaning, its wondrous truths are lucid and incisive. The meaning is supremely wonderful, and it is completely penetrating without obstruction, exceptionally clear. So after these teachings were proclaimed for Ananda and the rest, their mind's eye opened to understanding. This should mean their minds opened and their understanding was freed, or their minds and wisdom were completely opened up. Such a thing had never happened before. You see, actually we are quite pitiful. We also have we have already heard all of this completely. At that time the assembly was like, wow, so it was originally like this. Once this verse was taught, actually we, including what we just discussed about the ālaya and these things about the three kinds of meditative absorption, I wonder if we have had our minds open and understanding freed, or if we have suddenly seen the light thoroughly, a great and thorough awakening, or realized the fundamental ground. Have we had this kind of feeling or experience, or a kind of awakening? If we have, then we have also received the same blessings. If we haven't felt anything at all, just thinking, when will class end? What did I just eat for lunch? What am I eating tomorrow? What time can I go to sleep tonight? Do I have enough living expenses for this month? Are the vegetables sold here recently expensive? I still have quite a lot of rice. But if it sits for a long time, will it expire? Some people around me treat me poorly. How will I take revenge on them later? If this is the case, if you are thinking like this while listening to the class, then let alone never witnessed before, it seems like it's nothing special, no different from before. When others listen to the Dharma, they all have this kind of feeling. After everyone had this kind of feeling, Ananda put his palms together, bowed to the ground, and said respectfully to the Buddha, "You see, Ananda," his expression was still very obvious. He immediately put his palms together, immediately bowed to the Buddha. I have heard the Buddha, out of his unbounded compassion, speak these true words of Dharma concerning the purity, wondrousness, and everlastingness of our real nature. He said, "Today I heard the Buddha's great compassion without any concealment whatsoever, such an outpouring, and speaking of the fundamental nature that is pure, wondrous, everlasting, and true." After hearing these true words of Dharma, I am so happy, so joyous, so comfortable. Truly, it has been a very long time since I experienced this. Today's feeling is as if the clouds in the sky suddenly disappeared, and when the rays of the sun rose from the eastern mountains, wow, my heart feels so warm. So Ananda was exceptionally happy. But then his afflictions arose again. But I still do not fully understand the sequence for releasing the knots, such that when the 6 are untied, the 1 will vanish. But in my mind I still haven't fully comprehended the most crucial point just now. What I mentioned earlier was when the 6 are untied, the 1 will vanish. I haven't fully comprehended this principle of when the 6 are untied, the 1 will vanish. Additionally, the sequence for releasing the knots, untying our knots, releasing them in sequence, this principle of untying the knots in sequence, I haven't understood this either. I still haven't figured out these two questions. Ananda really had an extraordinary amount of questions. Some of our people are also like this, asking this question, asking that one. Actually, asking questions is a very good thing. Some questions, it's not good to ask questions without thinking, but it's very good to ask questions after having thought about them yourself. I hope that some of our Khenpos and Khenmos, including during our examinations, some still ask quite pertinent questions, but some questions are just, they haven't thought about them themselves, just like so is it like this, without even thinking it through themselves, just casually asking the questions having no depth, and having no real significance either. Asking like that isn't of much use. But if you still have some questions with depth, just like the ones Ananda asked, indeed here he asks about when the 6 are untied, the 1 will vanish. and also releasing the knots, opening the knots in sequence. He didn't understand these two questions, so I only hope that the Buddha will show us great kindness, and that, taking pity once again on this assembly and on beings of the future, he will bestow upon us words of Dharma that will cleanse us of impurities. He said, I once again pray to the Buddha of great loving kindness and great compassion to lovingly recall and take pity on all sentient beings present, including myself, all these sentient beings, and also for the sake of future sentient beings with affinity. He was still always thinking of us. At that time Ananda wasn't just thinking about himself, like give us this and that today. He was still, as long as these principles are taught, they will definitely be beneficial to future sentient beings. Actually, Ananda is an emanation of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. He is very formidable. Then he said, bestow upon us words of Dharma. You should bestow upon us these words of Dharma, this nectar of the Dharma's voice, and then cleanse within our mind streams these deep impurities accumulated since beginningless time. These settled defilements, can they all be washed away? Then the Buddha said, it will be very hard to wash them away before I finish teaching the Shurangama Sutra. You have too many questions. I don't know, for Ananda it seems someone the other day, in a study on the Shurangama Sutra, said, how many questions did Ananda ask? They said a book had written about this before. Inside this, some of us in the past, if you really study the Shurangama Sutra, it's very interesting. For example, in this, just like how they are now only counting how many times Ananda cried, but how many questions did Ananda ask? What exactly was each question? If written out in modern language, it might be very hard for us to answer. What was the first question? What was the second question? Doing this might be quite interesting. At this time, then the thus come one. What follows is a bit easier to understand. What is it? When Ananda asks this question again, the Buddha then uses an analogy, using a real-life analogy. You see, I just took a red kata. This is the analogy for Ananda. So I observe the dependent origination, and today it is a red kata. This is what follows, how the Buddha immediately answered Ananda. How did he answer the thus come one? Still sitting in the lion's seat, straightened his inner garment and arranged his robe. He reached out onto the table in front of him, which was inlaid with 7 kinds of precious things. He picked up an elegant presentation scarf, which had been given to him by a god from the heaven of self-restraint. Before the assembly he tied a knot in the scarf, and showing it to Ananda, he said, the Buddha was sitting on the lion's seat at the time. While on the lion's seat, the Buddha often gave some important teachings. At such times, often, just like us people in the world, he would tidy his clothes a bit. This happens. So what did he arrange? What did he tidy up here? The inner garment. Some say this is the Buddha's inner garment, the clothing worn inside. He straightened his inner garment a bit, and then arranged his robe, sangati. As for the sangati, on the outside it's what we often call the great robe or the kasaya. In Tibetan, the inner garment is not explicitly mentioned. The Buddha adjusted his entire set of clothes, his kasaya, straightening them a bit, arranging them slightly. Arranged here means to tidy up a bit. Perhaps when the Buddha was on the Dharma seat for a long time, sometimes he would slightly adjust his attire. Then he reached for something made of 7 kinds of precious things. The table here refers to something like a small tea table, in modern terms like a desk. Then he reached over to this small table made of 7 precious things, and on it he reached out his hand. After reaching out, he picked up, what did he pick up? A god from the heaven of self-restraint, Suyama. The heaven of self-restraint refers to the Suyama heaven, or the heaven free from strife. So the heaven free from strife had once offered an elegant presentation scarf to the Buddha. This presentation scarf is equivalent to a kind of what we now call a silk scarf or silk fabric. In Tibetan, both a kata and silk fabric share the same meaning, dar. Dar can be used to mean a kata, and it can also be used to mean silk fabric, but I think referring to it as a kata might also be acceptable, because perhaps heavenly beings as well consider the kata to be the best kind of gift. When they came from the heavens to make offerings to the Buddha, it is just like us people in the world today who come specifically from a certain place to visit a great master, bringing various kinds of katas. Of course, perhaps the silk fabric of heavenly beings, a kind of clothing of heavenly beings, is also called an elegant scarf. Generally it is woven. There is a kind of weaving, this kind of thing, equivalent to cloth. Actually, kata and the Tibetan word dar carry the meaning of both silk fabric and kata. The Buddha, from beside that small table, picked up something equivalent to a kata and then made a knot. I am not the Buddha, but I want to demonstrate how they did it. For our understanding, this might be clearer. Like this, making a knot, and then showed it to Ananda. After showing it to Ananda, he asked, "What is this?" Ananda and the others respectfully answered. Everyone unanimously said, "It is a knot. What you just tied is called, you tied a knot." The thus come one thereupon tied another knot in his elegantly patterned scarf. Then the Buddha took this kata or silk fabric from just now, and once again made a knot in this elegant scarf, and again asked Ananda, "And what is this?" He asked Ananda once again, "What is this?" At this time, each time Ananda and the others in the great assembly replied, "It is another knot. This is also a knot." Because he tied a knot twice, the Buddha tied a sequence of similar knots in his elegantly patterned scarf until 6 knots had been tied on top of one another. Then he continuously did this, and the Buddha asked again. After tying 6 knots, he asked 6 times. Actually, for each one, Ananda and the assembly said, "This is a knot." They also said, "It's a knot." A total of 6 times already. Each time as he held up the knot he had just tied, he asked Ananda, "And what is this?" Every time one became a knot, he asked again. Holding this knot in his hand, he continually asked, "What is this called? What is this called?" asking like this. Then each time Ananda and the others in the great assembly replied in the same manner, Ananda and the assembly were also like this, replying, "It is another knot," constantly saying it, answering him sequentially. Replying means to answer him. Answering what? Answering that. This is a knot. There are 6 knots in total. He tied 6 knots. It seems quite simple. Now the crucial point is below. The Buddha then said to Ananda, "The first time that I tied a knot in this elegantly patterned scarf, you said that it was a knot. To begin with, this precious scarf was in fact merely a scarf. Why did you answer a second and a third time, 'It is another knot'?" Then the Buddha said, "The one I just tied at the very beginning, I tied a knot in this kata, made a knot. At that time you said this was called a knot. Then again I used this elegant scarf to start asking, and then you said that initially this first strip is this knot. In that case, the first, the second, the third, the first has already passed and was called a knot. Then 3, 4, the third knot, the fourth knot, the fifth knot, and so on. Regarding these, do you also acknowledge these as knots?" It seems the meaning is the Buddha saying, the first one is this knot, it should be this knot. But do you think the second and the third, are these also called knots? At this point it seems the Buddha didn't quite acknowledge this. Then at this time Ananda began to answer him. Ananda said respectfully to the Buddha, "World-honored one, this precious, elegantly patterned and beautifully woven scarf is a single thing. But it seems to me that when the thus come one tied it once, he made what we would call a knot. If he had tied it 100 times, we would say there were 100 knots." At that time, Ananda answered the Buddha like this. He said, "Actually, this one you just had, whether it's silk fabric or this elegant scarf, actually this silk fabric you just brought over, or the precious silk fabric of heavenly beings, or kata, in reality, it is formed through a kind of sewing or a kind of weaving to make an elegant scarf. In that case, this entire thing where we tied 6 knots, its fundamental entity is only a single strip, there is only one entity. Since there is only one entity, according to my thoughts, Ananda's thought is also correct. When the thus come one ties it once, a knot is obtained. On this silk fabric, if you first tie a knot, then this can be named as 1, then you go from 1 like this to 2. If on this silk fabric you tied 100 knots, I would consider it to be 100 knots, because indeed you are, although it is one piece of silk fabric. But on this single piece of silk fabric, if you tied 100 knots, then I could say there are 100 knots. In fact, there are 6 knots in the scarf. The Buddha did not tie as many as 7, nor did he stop at 5. Moreover, yours doesn't even have 100. You only have 6 knots on a single piece of silk fabric, and these 6 knots do not exceed 7, nor are they less than 5. You didn't stop at 5. Stop at 4 or stop at 3. It's exactly 6 because it represents the 6 faculties. The Buddha used this analogy to explain what the fundamental nature of the 6 faculties is like and what each of their manifestations is like. He wanted to establish such an instruction, so at that time if you tied 100 knots, I could call it 100 knots. But you didn't tie 100 knots, you only tied 6 knots. 6 knots is neither more nor less. Why can't I call them knots? Why then does the thus come one acknowledge the first knot? So why is it that you seem to acknowledge the first knot, but not the second or the third? I am entirely confused. Why can't the second and the third be called knots? Only the first one can be called a knot, but the second, the third, and so on cannot be called knots. I don't quite understand this. At this point the Buddha told Ananda, the Buddha said to Ananda, this precious scarf is a single strip of cloth. The Buddha said, you know that whether it's this elegant scarf now or the kata, as for this you know it was originally just a single strip, right? It is a single strip, just one piece. My tying it 6 times might be said to have made 6 knots. Then if I tied 6 knots you call them, you name them as 6 knots. This is a viewpoint they both share, there is no dispute about it. Then the crucial issue is the following. But examine the question more carefully. The implication of your answers is that, although the essential nature of the scarf is unchanged, the knots have nevertheless changed it. Now you should observe carefully. Observe what? The fundamental entity of this elegant scarf is one, of the same entity. There is nothing unusual about this. However, due to the difference in the knots, it has different manifestations, because the first knot, the second knot, the third knot, the fourth knot, the fifth knot, the sixth knot, now we have 6 different knots like this. As for these 6 knots, they are the same on this kata, but these 6 knots are different because they are knots. What do you think? When I first tied a knot in the scarf, you said it was the first knot. So what do you think? The first knot that was tied at the very beginning isn't the first one named the first knot, right? It is like this. Until the 6th knot I tied, then it continues like this. After the second one is tied, it's called the second knot. After the third one is tied, it's called the third knot. The fourth, the fifth, the sixth. After all 6 are tied, it's the 6th knot, because each has its own way of being tied into a knot. In this case, isn't it that ultimately the 6th knot is produced? In that case the question arises, I ask you, would you call the 6th knot I tied the first knot? Then I ask, the 6th knot, don't we have 6 knots now? Then is the 6th knot the first knot? Then Ananda felt this was quite simple. No indeed, world-honored one, since there are 6 knots, we certainly cannot say that the 6th knot is the first knot. Then Ananda said, well, world-honored one, the 6th knot is definitely not the first knot. As long as the 6 knots exist, then the name of the 6th knot is absolutely not the first knot. We all know this. The 6th knot is over here, and the first knot is over here, so the 6th knot cannot possibly become the first one. This is impossible. He said, with all my lives devoted entirely to learning and debate, what would lead me to confuse the 6th knot with the first? He said, even if I, Ananda, go through my own numerous lifetimes, over many lifetimes, using my cleverest wisdom to discern, it is still forever impossible to turn the sixth knot into the first. Such a phenomenon of confusing the knots, I would absolutely never acknowledge. Not only do I not acknowledge it now, I will not acknowledge it in the future either. I wonder if he will later on. We are a bit worried. Ananda is often like this. At the very beginning he is very confident, but in the end he has no choice but to concede. He said, with this wisdom of mine, observing over however many lifetimes, it's definitely not. We are also thinking about this. Certainly the sixth knot cannot be the first knot. We wouldn't acknowledge this either. Then the Buddha said, you are right. The six knots are not identical. Let us examine how they were made. They were all created out of the one scarf. Still, it would not do to confuse their order. So the Buddha said, yes, what you said is very, very correct. The six knots, because they are distinct, are certainly not a single entity. But if you look at their fundamental entity, their causal condition, let us examine means to recall or trace back to a fundamental position, a fundamental cause, because these six knots are all on one kata. In this way, if we trace back their origin or their fundamental cause, they were actually created from a single elegant scarf. If that is the case, it would not do to confuse their order. To confuse them would also be impossible. He briefly explained this to him here. To have them completely confused like this is ultimately unestablished. The same may be said of the six faculties of perception. So your six faculties, this is just briefly mentioned here now. Today you should all think about it yourselves next. Actually relying on these methods, these are very profound, and the Buddha with great patience used an analogy to explain it to us. The Buddha said, our six faculties are also the same. Within what is ultimately one, differentiation eventually arises. Ultimately the fundamental nature, as we discussed before, the wondrous illuminating true mind, the matrix of the thus come one, emptiness within such a fundamental nature. As for our six faculties of eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind, their true fundamental entity is within the same fundamental nature. Whether it is the non-duality of clarity and emptiness, or the matrix of the thus come one, all are within one pure fundamental nature. Then, just like earlier, when a single kata was tied into six knots, within the fundamental nature of emptiness and luminosity, the six faculties manifested, differentiation eventually arises. So what is produced? Ultimately, distinct differences. They are distinct. The eye faculty is certainly not the nose faculty. The nose faculty is certainly not the ear faculty. So here, it is also the same. The first knot is certainly not the second knot. The second knot is certainly not the first knot. Or say, the sixth knot, the fourth knot. Among themselves, if viewed from their manifestations, they certainly will not be confused, but their essence is a single entity. So this issue, we might only be able to address it in the next class. After a few days will we forget it. We will stop here for today.
Sonandai Tanse Rugaya Tonani Dharma Pasi Tirgana Jirano Chukai Chupun Solen Droa
Bandangara Badma Sodargye Bandangara Badma Sodargye Bandangara Badma Sodargye